All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I'm your host. Thank you as always for listening, and interact with the product a little bit. It would help. Like, comment, subscribe if that's at all relevant. Star rating, written review, whatever your podcast platform of choice likes. Do a little of that. Help the show out. Help me out. We must stave off the algorithm, and it's ever devouring. I don't even know what to call it. I've heard too many fun descriptions of it to necessarily come up with a fully unique one of my own, but it ain't great. The algorithm is coming, people. So anything you can do to help us with that, much appreciated. And on the agenda this evening, probably going to be a fairly short show. We have UFC on ESPN 43 that took place on Saturday. That was a card. Overperformed relative to how it looked on paper, I think, safe to say. So we're going to go through all the results there. Then a little bit of news. Not a whole lot here that I think is really worth There's a couple of things that are worth touching on, but there is no UFC event this Saturday. It is April 1st. And I imagine they're staying out of the way of WrestleMania. The WWE has WrestleMania Night 1 on Saturday, Night 2 on Sunday. And frankly, if you're the UFC, it's easier to just avoid that one. So, nothing to preview in that respect. Should be relatively straightforward. Let's go ahead and get down to it, shall we? UFC on ESPN 43. Pretty solid card. It's all said and done. In your main event, I believe I picked this wrong. I can't remember how I picked specifically, but Cory Sandhagen defeats Marlon Vera via split decision. Split. It was a 48-47 for Vera, which I can't get behind at all. At all. A 50-45 for Sandhagen, which I don't completely agree with. That's more defensible than 48-47 for Sandhagen, but I don't agree with that. And then 49-46 for Sandhagen, which I believe was my scorecard. This was a pretty good fight overall. First couple of rounds pretty clearly for Sandhagen. Vera, bit of a slow starter, but when he gets rolling, he's got some violence, man. Even in a sport that is as fundamentally violent as MMA, and MMA is it's fighting. There are certain fighters who are just built for violence, and it stands out. And Chito Vera is one of those guys who is built for violence. He brings a lot of power to what he does. He doesn't mark up. He's there for the long haul. In fact, longer fights tend to be worse for you if you're fighting him because it gives him just more chances to wear you down and to catch you. A couple of things here as far as how this fight played out. A lot of earlier wrestling from Sandhagen to not only bank rounds, but to, I think, further instill in Vera, be a little bit more cautious. Not a lot of movement from Sandhagen early. I think he was content to let Vera dictate elements of the pace as far as movement goes. Once Vera started upping the tempo in a little bit of the later rounds, he was happy to match that and moved very well, fought very well. But when Vera was going to be a little bit flatter, and he was early, Sandhagen didn't go out of his way to dance around. He was willing to do just enough to constantly be in the better position, but not, burn a ton of energy running around the cage. Vera's takedown defense started getting better as the fight wore on. Jabs back and forth were pretty good. The big thing here, this hurt Vera, just the output from Sandhagen. I mean, Sandhagen outlanded him more than 2-1 over the course of the 5 rounds. Vera didn't really get going until later, and by the time he got going, he couldn't really build momentum on what he was doing. I gave Vera the 4th. I thought that was Sandhagen's least effective round. That's more why Vera got it. Not that Vera did bad work, but that was the easiest round to give to Vera. 3 was decently. 3 was a relatively competitive round. I can see the argument for Vera in the third. I don't agree, but I can see it. And I don't think Vera did enough to win the fifth. Sandhagen did a lot of circling, but Vera was not landing anything of real significance. This wasn't quite the barn burner we all thought it might be, but it was still a pretty darn good fight. Solid win for Sandhagen. After the fight, he called out Merab Dvalishvili. Sure, I'm not going to complain about that one. If Sandhagen wins that, he is undisputedly your number one contender. I don't know what good comes of Merab winning that fight, but they're in a weird spot at bantamweight. I mean, if Merab is going to hang tough to his guns about not fighting Aljamain Sterling, you're going to have to do something. Now, Sterling's hinted about maybe moving up to 145, in which case it would be entirely appropriate for Merab to be one half of a fight for the vacant belt. Entirely appropriate. Or Cejudo might beat Sterling. That's not what I think is going to happen, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. And if Cejudo wins, then, the whole thing gets upended, so who knows. But, yeah, between now and then, Sandhagen and Merab is not a bad fight to make. Sandhagen's got a motor to kind of match Merab's. The wrestling might be a problem, but Sandhagen's pretty good about putting damage on people. And Merab, he can get marked up. So, I don't know. It's not a bad fight. I still think Vera's, he's still a very good bantamweight. He's got to figure out this first round thing, though, man. I mean, someone mentioned him and Petr Yan makes a lot of sense. I'm not saying it doesn't. I think I saw Shaquille Majori, though, kind of tweet out that would be two of the first two rounds of nothing, followed by the most impressive singular round in UFC history. Which again is obviously a touch facetious, but speaks to a truth about how both of those guys fight. I can see that fight being made. I mean, I don't know. The bantamweight's just so good. There's a lot of ways you could go with Vera and have it still make sense. So that was our main event. Solid fight. Solid fight. Not fight of the night. Probably would have been if not for your actual fight of the night winner. So would it have? Yeah, I think it would have. So that was the main event. Co-main event. At women's bantamweight, Holly Holm defeats Yana Santos, the former Yana Kunitskaya. She married Thiago Santos. 30-26 and then 2 30-27s. I was 30-25. Not giving Holly a 10-8 second just seems wrong. Like, I might have been generous with the third round 10-8, but Santos came out and insisted on clinching, and that just didn't go well for her. Holm managed to weather kind of the early storm, let Santos kind of tire herself out, straining a lot in the clinch. Got takedowns, got better position, just control, ground and pound, pretty. Yeah, that's kind of how that went. Holm needed a decent enough rebound win. She got it. This was the first fight on her new 6-fight deal. You saw Jack Slack tweet that there's a bunch of people out there who still do, oh, Holly Holm's fighting. She head kicked Ronda. I'm going to watch it because Holly's still fairly popular. And the facetious part of this was and they must have just, forgotten every other Holly Holm fight since the Ronda Rousey fight, despite seeing all of them. Because, look, I'm not here to knock Holly, all right? I've said before that I think she rates very highly on the pantheon of women's MMA combat, not just women's MMA, sorry, female combat sports athletes. With her success across, boxing and MMA, so I'm not here to dunk on her in that respect, but her fights they're not usually the most entertaining in the world. Um, yeah, I don't know exactly where she goes next from here, but women's bantamweight is not in a great spot overall, so who knows? Next up, featherweight. Nate Landwehr defeats Austin Lingo via rear naked choke for 11 of the second. Lingo had a pretty good first round, but he couldn't keep up the pace, couldn't deal with the pressure, and Landwehr kind of broke him down as the fight kept going on. Just, again, kept pace, was stabbing him with front kicks to the body, some nasty ones. Nice little finishing sequence, too, from Landwehr. Gets the back and gets the choke before he gets the hooks in. Lingo he's on his, I think he was on his knees, fighting his way up, and Landwehr behind him throws the right hand, uses that punch to kind of wrap the arm fully around the neck, locks in the choke. That's all she wrote. Landwehr's he's usually good for a fight. Women's flyweight, Macy Barber defeated Andrea Lee via split decision. There was a 29-28 either way, and then a 30-27 for Barber. That is utter crap. No way Barber should have won the first round. Like I can see 29-28 Barber. I don't agree with it, but I can understand. 30-27, no. Like I was, man, you gotta feel bad for. Like I know Andrea Lee's like some of her personal choices with in her life, like because she was attached romantically to a guy who was like a neo-Nazi, and that ended badly, as one can imagine it would. But you got to feel bad for her career, man. She's dropped like 3 of these really close split decisions that she probably should have won. This one, her fight with Lauren Murphy, I thought she won. Her fight with Joanne Calderwood. Wood now, but at the time she was Joanne Calderwood. I thought she won that one. She just can't buy a decision for love or money, it seems. Yeah, that's just kind of how that. The fight itself, I don't have a whole lot here. Barber kind of got out grappled, but did some decent work on the feet. And when they were on the ground, was the one kind of like trying to do a bit more damage. So we need to have a reckoning. Like this fight in particular should show this. Grappling in MMA is not rewarded as a general rule. Like that 30-27 for Barber has to completely ignore Andrea Lee having side control for like minutes in that first round. You just have to utterly disregard positional dominance. Utterly. And I'm not down with that, man. I think that particular... Look, there was a time when takedowns were overvalued. I was around for it. It wasn't great. That pendulum has swung too far back. We have way overcorrected to the point where takedowns mean nothing. If you're not dealing significant damage, it doesn't even matter what position you're in, right? Like, the only thing that matters is how much you're able to do. So unless you actually get the back for, like, the round, they don't care. And it's not great, man. Again, we're not in a happy spot with this, as far as judging goes. Let's see. Next up, middleweight. Albert Duraev defeated Chidi Njokuani via split decision. They were 29-28. No issue with 29-28 either way. Duraev had a good first round. They both kind of punted the second, and I thought Njokuani took the third. And when you have that kind of a fight, you just kind of you can't be mad at 29-28 either way. When you've got 2 clear rounds and 1 round that's just really close. Featherweight Daniel Pineda defeated Tucker Lutz via guillotine choke, 250 of the second. Pineda was a pretty decent underdog to Lutz here, but he came out and he had something to prove. These 2 guys both got after it. Nice finish from Pineda, actually. You can see Lutz, he's kind of, they're caught in a little bit of a scramble. Lutz comes up looking for, to wrestle from his knees. And he's worried about the left arm of Pineda. Like, that's the one he seems to think is coming for him. And as he overcorrects to avoid the left arm, he puts his head under the right, and that lets Pineda lock up the choke. Some really nice elements of the finishing bit here. You can look that up online if you're so inclined. Good stuff from Pineda. Fun little fight. Okay, but before I get to the prelims, very briefly, we lost 2 fights off of this card. One of them we lost on weigh-in day. That was, what was it? Manuel Torres and Trey Ogden. There was some kind of medical issue for Torres. He missed weight, and between it all, it was like, nope. The other one that we lost, because I think I previewed this actually, Tamiris Vidal and Haley Cowan. That got postponed due to something with Vidal. The fight got scrapped. Then on the broadcast, we were informed that we lost Manel Kopp and Alex Perez. Now, Perez has clarified what happened a little bit. He had a seizure when he was in the back warming up. Kopp is understandably pissed. He went on a bit of a social media tirade. Which, again, like, dude, I feel bad for both of these guys. I mean, if we bring up old Alex Perez here, since his there you are. Because not that one. There you are. So Perez, since his loss to Davison Figueiredo, the title fight, he lost that in November of 2020. He had, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 canceled fights. In order: Matt Schnell, Askar Askarov, Matt Schnell, Matt Schnell, Matt Schnell, Askarov again. That was all of 2021 for him. And then the last 2 were in 2022. He finally fights in July of 22, loses to Alexandre Pantoja, is scheduled for December of 2022 to fight Amir Albazi. That falls out. Supposed to fight in February of this year. Kai Kara France, that falls out. And then this one falls out. I mean, last year he would have been, if I hadn't lost all of my notes about this when my old computer died. He would have been my 2022 Ian McCall Memorial Worst Luck in MMA recipient. I mean, that is a horrible stretch of bad luck. He might get it this year. Just as a little bit like a retroactive apology, too, because, man. And again, I understand Kopp's frustration. You know, he's had some canceled fights recently, too. I mean, in 2022, he only fought once. A win over David Dvorak, but he was supposed to fight in April of that year, Sumudarji. That fell apart. Then in June, he's supposed to fight Rogerio Bontorin. That fell apart. He finally fights Dvorak, wins. That was that was December of last year. Now he loses this one. Like, I understand his frustration too. Like, it sucks for both guys, and it sucks for the fans. Like, that was gonna be a good fight. I was looking forward to it. So that's the other one we lost. Anyway, as for the prelims, at featherweight, Lucas Alexander defeated Steven Peterson via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Really sharp striking out of Alexander here. Peterson just never got going. Peterson retired after the fight. Makes sense. I mean, the guy has... let me take a quick look at Peterson here. He's 32, so maybe a little bit young. But he's got 30 fights, and he's been fighting since 2000. Not 2000. That would be ridiculous. 2010. So, 13 years, 30 fights. Yeah, I can see it. I can see it. So, wait and see if it sticks. That was a pretty good fight. At welterweight, Trevin Giles defeated Preston Parsons via split decision, 29-28. Can't complain about that. Pretty good fight. Wait, could I complain about that? A little bit, maybe. What was the other? Hang on. There were some bad... Because there were some not great scores. Yeah, no, this is one of them. Sorry, was confusing this with... no, this should not have been split. This was pretty clearly Giles' fight. There were some bad scorecards last night, man. Again, that 3-2 for Vera in the main event. The lack of 10-8s for Holly Holm in the co-main. Lee and Barber, again, I disagree with it. But the 30-27 for Barber is crap. Then this one, like, no, just bad night, man. I mean, look, let me clown on Texas for just a minute here. The Texas Licensing and Regulatory Board, or whatever the heck it is. There was a referee, and there was a Fury event in Texas, I believe, with one of the all-time worst referee performances ever. And I mean that. He watched a fighter get choked unconscious, never checked any of the limbs, never checked anything, wasn't stopping it. Dude switches to an armbar, and because the guy was just unconscious, he doesn't really tap in a quick manner. It gets slowed down. There's that guy's elbow is messed up now. He does tap eventually, but I mean he's needing surgery on that. His elbow's jacked. It's a terrible, terrible performance from that referee, and he was one of the judges on some of these, I think. Like, the relevant governing body for the state of Texas about this stuff has been a joke for a long time. A real long time. And this was not exactly a move to improve their reputation. Just put it like that. Okay, next up, flyweight, CJ Vergara defeated Daniel Lacerda / De Silva via TKO 404 the second. This was nuts. Oh, by the way, the judges did not give Lacerda here a 10-8 first, which he should have had. They go out a little bit back and forth, but things heat up. Lacerda lands a wheel kick. Rocks Vergara, gets him a little bit off balance. He goes after him. He spends like 2 minutes chasing this guy down, swinging at him. Vergara literally runs away in a couple of points. But when the referee's like, you can't do that, he does start throwing back a little bit. Like, he indicates he's still willing to fight. He's not just running away scared. He survives, but again, that should have been a 10-8. They could have stopped this. It was Jason Herzog. He really could have stopped that fight in the first round, and I don't think there were a couple of points when nobody would have been mad about it. But he doesn't. Vergara persists. Lacerda gasses. Vergara gets him out of there in the second. Wild fight. This is your fight of the night. No issues with me there. Deservedly so. And kicking everything off, Victor Altamirano defeated Vinicius Salvador via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. This was a decent little flyweight fight. Not great. Dude, Salvador has those just ugly, ugly hooks. Like, you see him coming from a mile away. You're a flyweight, man. You're making your hands slower. They always wind up, and they're like straight arm, and they're wide, and they're not great. Really not great. You should not be punching like that in the UFC, especially in this weight class. Thinking overall, mostly this was Altamirano wrestling his way to victory. A couple of good striking exchanges. Again, not a bad fight, actually. Kicked off the night in a pretty decent way. Your bonuses, I mentioned already. Fight of the night was CJ Vergara and Daniel Cerda. Performances went to the only two finishes on the entire card. Well, the other two finishes, rather, because Vergara got one. But that would be Nate Landwehr and Daniel Pineda. Yeah, a lot of decisions. A lot of decisions on that card. And, yeah, that's it. Again, this was held in San Antonio. The Texans who fought on this card did decently throughout the evening. Yeah, if you want my full report, it's in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Give it a look. There's clips of the finishes, as well as my live round-by-round scoring and whatnot, so y'all know the drill by now. Give that a read if you're so inclined. Always appreciate it. We are going to be short this evening. Or whenever you happen to be listening to this, I'm just recording it late at night. Alright, let's move on. So, let's talk about Colby Covington. So, Dana White is insisting that Colby Covington will get the next title shot at welterweight. I said last week, I believe it was, that from a meritocratic standpoint, it should be Bilal Muhammad. I stand by that. I'm not exactly a fan of Muhammad, not a fan of Covington necessarily either, but I think that when you start, here's the thing. The UFC plays favorites. They've always played favorites. This isn't news. However, you're in danger here of violating an assumption that you don't want to violate. Okay, there's an assumption amongst fighters, and some of the fans more generally, but fighters in particular. If you're not a big name or a big personality, that if you win enough, you will still be rewarded. Now, there's a little bit of a twist to this that you have to be aware of. We kind of call this call it the John Fitch route to the title, right? Like you just keep winning. And maybe the UFC doesn't like you, but if you win enough, they have to give you a title shot at some point. And so this isn't always about you being an unmarketable guy. I mean, for crying out loud. Look at how many, like Max Holloway had a pretty darn big winning streak before he fought for the belt. Tony Ferguson had that incredible run and never fought for the real belt. Was an interim champion briefly, and then lost an interim title fight with Gagey. But is Tony not marketable? No, of course not. But if you look at who else was fighting, there were favorites, and Tony wasn't one of them. Now, the danger in taking the I'm just going to keep winning route is that you tend to only get one shot at it. And John Fitch got one shot at the UFC welterweight title. One. He lost, and he never got close to it again. Other guys have done the same thing, man. Like, you grind, and you win, and maybe they're not the most exciting fights. But the assumption is, if I do this enough, they have to give me a title shot. The reality is they don't. The UFC is beholden to no one in regards to this. When Marlon Vera mentioned in the lead up to this last fight, like, no, I don't care about the rankings. The UFC does whatever they want to do anyway. He's not wrong. Look, it should be Bilal Muhammad by the meritocratic standpoint. And I'd rather the UFC had a bit more meritocracy in it. I talked about this a little bit last week. Like, I'm not saying there's zero case for Covington. I thought he beat Usman in their second fight. Like, I scored it for him. And his only losses, I think his only losses recently are to Usman. He had that one weird one earlier in his career, but yeah, that's it. Like, in the last 8 years, he's lost to exactly one guy. I'm not saying there's no case to be made. I'm saying it's not the best case in the world. And a lot of people are pushing back on this a little bit. And Colby Covington doing the rounds, promotion, doing the podcast rounds and whatnot, doing his shtick. And yes, I think it's shtick. That's not to excuse what I'm about to talk about, but it is shtick. You just still have to be careful with what you say. Among the people pushing back on the notion that he should be next is UFC lead commentator John Anik. And there were some insinuations of violence made by Colby Covington towards John Anik and amongst other people in his general sort of tirade. Now, I'm not going to be one of those guys and go, you've got to go through me, buddy. Like, Covington could beat the crap out of me. I'm not under any delusion here. But there's a couple of things that we need to unpack here. One, I mentioned this. Yes, this is shtick. That doesn't excuse it, right? That really doesn't excuse it. It just means some of the reaction to this, and unless you're actually John Anik, like, some of the reaction to this is a little bit I shouldn't say overblown. There's a bit of an overreaction going on here by certain people. As though Colby Covington's actually going to go out and try to commit assault on John Anik. He's not. He shouldn't have said what he said. He really, I'm not defending it in that respect. You've got to know where the line is with your shtick. You really do. And because there are some people who, when it's not shtick, have had serious consequences for stuff like this. If you'll recall, those of you who've been around for long enough to remember this, Frank Mir and Brock Lesnar do not like each other. Frank Mir was fired from his commentary gig with Zuffa at the time for saying publicly that he hoped Brock Lesnar would be the first death in the octagon. And look, was Mir exaggerating slightly? Probably slightly. Is his animosity for Brock Lesnar very real? Oh yeah, you better believe it. And there were consequences for that. If the UFC does nothing to Covington for threatening violence to their lead commentator, again, I know it's shtick. You still can't do this. Can't's a strong word. There's not. Again, I'm not. When I say you can't, we use absolutes like that in ways that make that when it gets repeated enough, there's a general tenor in the conversation that shifts. And I'm not always in favor of that. I'm something of a radical free speech absolutist especially in the governmental sense. But again, like if you say you can't enough, then people start thinking, well, then why don't we ... And I'm not down with that. But as a private enterprise, the UFC, and again, people misunderstand freedom of speech all the time. Like, freedom of speech just prevents the government from doing anything about anything you say. And there's a handful of limitations on that. People like to cite, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Actually, that's not the statute. There are a couple of you have to be very careful with limiting free speech because it's so foundational to the freedoms that the United States is founded on. But any private entity is more than welcome to police speech. Like, if an office space might have a policy of no swearing. Seems a little extreme to me, but they might. You can't. There's certain, off-color jokes or topics that are not permissible in the workplace because the workplace says that, and that's perfectly legal. And again, this is just one of those things that engaging in this behavior, if you're Covington, even if it's shtick, and again, it is shtick, this should have serious consequences. I mean, at a bare minimum, you've opened up John Anik to a mountain more of abuse across various social media platforms than he was already taking. And as a public-facing figure who does commentary for MMA, he gets a fair amount of that crap already, much of it undeserved. Not all of it. By his own admission, he's not perfect. I mean, no one is. But there's reasonable criticism, and then there's, the mountain of maladjusted weirdos that follow MMA that if a fighter they like, for whatever reason, decides they have some kind of issue with another person, just jump onto that like freaking lemmings being pointed. It's like cats chasing a laser pointer. Like it's just not great. And look, that's not on. In some respects, that's not on Covington, right? Like he is not responsible for what idiots do. But it does show poor judgment on his part. So again, he kind of went off on a bunch of people, and he doesn't. I don't know if he's rusty at it or whatnot, but he's not quite found the right line with his shtick yet. Well, recently at least. And well, again, it just kind of is what it is. There should be consequences for what he said. Like that's all I'm going to say on that. There should be some kind of repercussions for that, because that's not, genuinely speaking, acceptable behavior. All right, let's see. What else do we got for news? Small news item here, but seems Paulo Costa will be staying with the UFC. And he might be making, depending on, look, there are some reports that he'll be making around $1 million a fight. Have to wait and see if that plays out. If he fights anywhere that actually does purse disclosures, which is an increasingly small number of locations, but we'll see. I'm fine with him sticking around. Like, he's a little bit of a weird guy. He was riding a really fine line for a little bit there, with people maybe turning on him. Then he kind of leaned into some of the gimmickry, right? He got a little bit silly, and I think that whole thing with the Robert Whittaker fight for the Australia card actually made him look good, because for a while, if you'll recall, like the UFC announced that fight, and he came out immediately and said, "I have not signed a bout agreement for this." He said this publicly. Haven't signed it. UFC's announcing something that's not real. Don't be fooled. And that was his line all the way up until the UFC had to admit that fight's off. It was never on. And the fact that he was so kind of forward-facing with that, I think, helped him a lot. So, again, him sticking around, yeah, I'm not opposed to it. He's still probably a worthwhile middleweight. Have to wait and see, but I'm not opposed to him sticking around. So, all right, that's all I've got at the moment. Boy, this was short. Short fight card without a whole lot to delve into. No preview. It's going to be a short episode. All right, let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy is broken. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here. Alrighty, nope. Nothing worth talking about there. Sue, plugs. What we got? Monday. Special Monday edition of Damn You Hollywood. We will be reviewing John Wick Chapter 4. That will be myself, Mark Radulich, Alexis Haina, and... No, is that just me and Mark? Dang, that might just be me and Mark. I'll double check that, but at a minimum, me and Mark. So that'll be, again, Monday. If you're interested in our thoughts on movies, we talk about the craft, we talk about what we liked, we talk about the box office returns, and we lampoon bad critics. So we do a little bit of it all over on Damn You Hollywood. Let's see. Other than that, my usual spate of professional wrestling coverage. So AEW's Dark Elevation on Monday, WWE SmackDown on Friday. No UFC event this Saturday, again, WrestleMania. I am not covering WrestleMania at the moment. Have not been asked, so we will see how that goes throughout the week. I know that if you're for 411, Jeff Harris will be on site and is credentialed. So big shout out to Jeff. Hope that all goes smoothly, but I'm usually on deck. It's one of my jobs. I am perpetually on deck guy to just try and cover stuff if something falls apart. So we'll see. But be on the lookout for any and all of that next week. We will be back here and we will preview UFC 287, the rematch of a rematch. of a rematch. It's the fourth fight overall between Alex Pereira, your new UFC middleweight champion, and former champion Israel Adesanya. Um, Co-main event, Gilbert Burns and Jorge Masvidal. Also on that main card, Rob Font and Adrian Yanez. That's great. Kevin Holland and Santiago Ponzinibbio will be fine. Don't care about Will Rosas Jr. and Christian Rodriguez. That shouldn't be on the main card. Kelvin Gastelum and Chris Curtis is not a bad fight. That should be on the main card over Rosas Jr. Michael Chiesa and Li Jing Liang, not bad. Chris Barnett and Chase Sherman, that'll probably suck, but it should be at least comical. You know what? Yeah, again, full preview next week, but that's a very solid card. It's a very solid card. I'm not hating on any of that pretty much, so. All right, full preview next week. All right, that's it for me. Wow. Efficient this week, man. I am efficient this week. Good for me. All right, I hope you all enjoyed the show. I hope I was able to keep you a little bit of company, whether that's on your commute, putting your kids to sleep, do your companion for when you're doing cardio. I don't know. However you're listening, wherever you're listening, I just thank you for it. So thank you. Stay safe out there as always, and until next time, continue to be well, be safe, and behave.